Star Trek Picard, I don't know. It's the most befuddling of the current Star Trek shows. The first season has its moments, but is also wildly uneven, jam-packed with potentially interesting ideas it seems to have no idea what to do with. And then in season 2, there's just a lot. I reviewed season 2 as it was originally released earlier this year, and I touched on a lot of the problems with it in those videos, but with season 3 coming in just a few months, now seems like as good a time as any to take another look back at Star Trek Picard season 2 as a whole and try to articulate what actually went wrong. And if you did happen to watch my episode reviews of Picard Season 2, you know that my issues with the show are numerous and varied. I believe I called it the most bafflingly bad television series I'd ever seen, and by far the worst season of a Star Trek show ever, hitting the previous rock bottom established by TNG's rotten first season and declaring, "Not deep enough! Don't stop digging until we hit mantle!" All of my major issues with Picard Season 2 are related to the writing of the show. The cast is fine, even excellent at times. The production value is solid, though the show has never looked as good as its sister show, Star Trek Discovery, and the filmmaking is competent, if not particularly impressive. It's mostly a well-acted, decently made show, produced from scripts that were apparently shredded by hand, dumped into a raffle ticket drum, and randomly drawn and taped back together one piece at a time a few minutes before the start of principal photography. Copious and diverse though they are, Picard Season 2's writing problems can be sorted into 3 main categories. The first of those categories, and for me, the home of the most significant and inexplicable and inexcusable of the show's issues, is plot and story structure. There are a couple of plot and story structure problems that are unique to Picard Season 2, within the Star Trek franchise anyway, but a big one is something that has also afflicted Star Trek Discovery since the beginning. Poor pacing. Specifically, that the overarching story of the season proceeds too slowly, resulting in many episodes where little or nothing of consequence happens. Both seasons of Star Trek Picard so far have suffered from storytelling that attempts to take one episode's worth of story and stretch it across 3 episodes. This is most obvious at the start of the season, where what should be the plot point at the end of episode 1 isn't reached until episode 3. Star Trek Picard Season 2 is about Picard and his crew from the starship La Sirena traveling back in time to the year 2024 to prevent a change in the timeline that wiped out the Federation and replaced it with a human supremacist totalitarian dictatorship. But the characters don't actually do the time travel until midway through episode 3. Episode 1 is spent almost entirely on reintroduction and table setting. Episode 2 is spent watching the characters grope around in the alternate reality, trying to figure out what happened and how to fix it. And then, finally, Episode 3 sees them go back to the 21st century, and the plot of the season finally starts to move. Now, someone might defend this pacing by saying that spending the entirety of Episode 2 and a portion of Episode 3 in the bleak alternate reality is necessary because we need to see how bad it is, so we understand what's motivating the characters. But my response to that is, do we? I agree that it's important to establish the alternate reality, but to my way of thinking, we only need to establish 3 fairly basic elements of that alternate reality. It's different, it's bad, and it's specifically bad because the regime is built on human supremacist conquest and xenophobia. And you only need to establish that third one if you assume the rest of the series will have something meaningful to say about the wrongness and danger of xenophobia, which, spoiler alert, it doesn't. But it should, so let's assume we need to establish all 3 things. That shouldn't take an entire episode. let alone an entire episode and part of another one. I know some folks who enjoyed Picard Season 2 have said they appreciated getting to spend time in the alternate reality, and that's fine, to each their own, but this isn't a theme park or an open-world video game that the audience is free to wander through unguided. It's a story, and in a good story, things need to happen. Important things that move the story forward. Spending an entire episode establishing an alternate reality that, once left, is never going to be seen again is a waste of time. Get to it, establish it, and then get on with what the series is actually going to be about by the end of episode 1. Instead, we take 3 episodes to tell the amount of story that could have and should have been told in 1 episode. That pattern continues for the rest of the season. The pacing problems are only exacerbated by other issues pertaining to the plot and story structure of the season, including a series of frustrating narrative dead ends, subplots that are started, seem to be headed somewhere meaningful, and then are just dropped and forgotten about, having added nothing of substance to the story. I'm going to mention several examples of this, but the most egregious by far is the subplot involving Captain Rios being arrested by ICE and taken to a migrant detention facility. This seems like the setup for some classic Star Trek social commentary. A man from the enlightened and tolerant future being forced to confront the racist cruelty of 21st century American immigration policy. A story that gives Star Trek the opportunity to do one of the things it has always done best: argue passionately and intelligently in favor of human rights and social justice. What happens instead? Rios spends an episode in ICE detention, gets tased early on, and then mostly just sits around and watches the guards mistreating his fellow detainees while doing nothing about it, allows himself to be marched onto a bus to be transferred to a sanctuary district, doesn't try to escape, doesn't try to help anyone, except, briefly, the woman he's attracted to, and waits around until his friends rescue him, and then, after he is rescued from ICE custody by Seven and Raffi, he never mentions it again. It's like it didn't even happen. It has no impact on the plot of the season or the character of Rios going forward. It has nothing to say other than perhaps the vague, limp message that ICE sucks. Well, no shit. It accomplishes nothing, narratively speaking. It is a complete waste of time. The ICE subplot is so utterly pointless that, as the episodes were being released, some viewers refused to believe it. After all, Rios was rescued from ICE in episode 5. There was still half the season yet to come. Surely this story thread would be picked up again, become relevant, at some point. Nope. It changes nothing, and it means nothing, and it's not alone. At the end of episode 7, Jean-Luc Picard and the 21st century version of Guinan are picked up by the FBI. They spend all of the following episode in FBI custody, only to be released at the end because the FBI agent who arrested them in the first place has been fired. When the team decides they need to infiltrate a fancy dress NASA party in order to guard an astronaut ancestor of Picard's, who may or may not be important to restoring the timeline, Dr. Girardi suggests hacking the security database to input false identities for everyone so that they're able to get inside without triggering an alarm. When Rios voices skepticism about Girardi's chances for success, Picard puts him at ease by declaring confidently, "I have a plan." Cut to Girardi entering the gala, being flagged by security and arrested, and then, in the next episode, hacking into the security computer and uploading the false identities, just like she said she would, in time for Picard and the others to be admitted. So, what was Picard's plan exactly? If all it involved was having Girardi get arrested on purpose so she could access the security computer, that's not really Picard's plan, is it? That's Girardi's plan. Did they just have Picard say he had a plan because they needed a way out of that scene? And the best they could come up with was setting up something they had no intention of paying off? Picard has a plan! Ooh, and the camera pushed in, and look, he's smiling. This must be a good plan. I can't wait to see what the plan involves. Oh, never mind, it's nothing. There's also Dr. Girardi's warning to the others as they prepare to venture out into the 21st century to avoid butterflies, referring, of course, to the butterfly effect, meaning that they should be careful not to do anything that might alter history, until they figure out what the alteration of history they're here to prevent is, anyway. This isn't so much a narrative dead end as it is an element that is introduced and then immediately dropped. None of these characters ever behave as though they have the slightest concern about their actions unintentionally altering the timeline, even though their entire purpose for being here is, supposedly, to stop the timeline from being altered. When Raffi and Seven arrive on the road as the ice bus carrying Rios approaches, they emphasize that the challenge before them includes not only safely extracting Rios, but doing so without butterflies. Then they proceed to stop the bus, break it open, collect Rios, and also allow every other migrant detained on the bus to escape into the countryside. I'd say an entire bus full of people escaping into the general population of the United States as a direct result of the actions of the time travelers is a pretty big butterfly, wouldn't you? I'm not saying we as the audience should be made to view migrants escaping from ICE custody as a bad thing. To hell with ICE. People escaping from ICE custody is a great thing. I'm saying based on what was previously established and also based on what they just said themselves a few minutes before, Raffi and Seven should have been concerned about the ramifications of their actions. And they weren't. At all. Having the characters take avoiding butterflies seriously, in previous Trek shows and movies, this has been referred to as the temporal prime directive, the rule that time travelers are supposed to make every effort to ensure their presence doesn't alter the timeline, could have been a source of tension in the series. It could have imposed difficult choices on these characters. They're citizens of a future world where equality and justice are deeply established facts of life. So, of course, when they see a group of people unfairly imprisoned and subjected to terrible abuse, they're going to want to free them. But what if they can't? Because doing so would violate the temporal prime directive and jeopardize their entire mission. Alternatively, if the writers had no intention of showing the characters struggling to avoid butterflies as they explore the 21st century and attempt to do what they have to do, why even bring it up at all? Why have Girardi warn them to avoid affecting the timeline, and then have Seven and Raffi mention it again when no one ever behaves as though they actually care about that? Just leave it out then. You wrote this ahead of time. You could have done that. I think actually making the necessity of avoiding butterflies a part of the story would have been the better choice, however, because it could have led to circumstances where the characters are forced to make meaningful choices that affect the outcome of the story, and there aren't very many of those. This leads me to the next plot/story structure problem. Plot advancements aren't actually earned by the characters. The protagonists of Star Trek Picard Season 2 don't get closer to accomplishing their goals by solving problems or winning fights or conducting investigations and discovering clues. They mostly have their problems solved for them, like when Rios waits for Seven and Raffi to bust him out of ICE custody, or when Picard and Guinan just kinda hang out in FBI custody until the arresting agent lets them go. In the few instances where the heroes do actually solve a problem or learn a piece of crucial information for themselves, it's presented in such a vague, half-assed form that I'm left wondering why the writers even bothered. For example, in Episode 4, Picard and Girardi are trying to figure out more about what they need to do in order to restore the timeline. Girardi has recently done the Borg equivalent of a mind meld with the Borg Queen, who possesses a lot of the necessary information but isn't willing to share, while they ponder how to unlock more of the information left in Girardi's head after connecting with the Queen. Picard notices a few repeated appearances of the number 15. While playing with an abacus, Girardi has moved 15 beads. The volume of an encyclopedia recently pulled from the bookshelf is number 15. The vintage of the bottle of wine Girardi just found is 1915. From these clues, they conclude that something important is going to happen on the 15th of the month. Why the 15th of the month? Why not 15 days after their arrival or 15 hours? How do they know 15 refers to a time instead of something else like a location, or that it's not merely meant to point them toward another more revealing clue? How do they know the 15s mean anything at all? They don't. Or at least none of that is ever explained. Picard simply notices a few examples of 15 connected to Girardi's actions of the last few minutes, assumes they must be connected and meaningful, makes a guess at their meaning, and that guess is immediately accepted as correct, which apparently it is. How lucky for them! It doesn't tell us anything about Picard or Girardi. It doesn't show them being sharp or clever. It shows them noticing something, immediately assuming there's a pattern, and taking a wild leap to a deduction that just so happens to be correct. And again, that's one of the few examples where we see the characters even doing that much. Typically, information or solutions to problems just kind of fall in their lap. I characterize this as a plot problem, but it's a character problem too. One of the most effective ways to develop characters in a story is to simply follow them as they pursue their goals and confront the obstacles that stand between them and those goals. How they deal with those obstacles shows us things about who they are, and hopefully why we should care about them and want them to succeed or fail, as the case may be. Of course, that also presupposes that the characters have goals. Which brings me to the last plot problem with Picard Season 2, and for me the most bewildering. In most stories, especially adventure stories like Star Trek, including Picard, it's important for the characters to have goals, things they want, need, or are trying to accomplish, and for the audience to know what those goals are. Did I say it's important? It's more like fundamental. As in, it's difficult to effectively tell a story if you don't establish what your characters want or need or are trying to accomplish. These things need to be established not just in terms of the big picture, but in smaller, more immediate forms as well. You can write a story about a character whose big picture goal is to be happy, which is understandable and sympathetic. Who doesn't want to be happy? But unless we break that big goal down into smaller goals, we're probably not going to have much of a story. Our protagonist wants to be happy. So, how does it go about trying to find happiness, specifically? Establishing immediate goals for characters not only animates the plot, it also brings the story into focus, making it feel more concrete. In Season 2 of Star Trek Picard, the characters have a big picture goal, all right, to bring back the Federation by restoring the timeline to its previous state, but once they arrive in the 21st century, the show does a terrible job of establishing what specifically the characters are trying to do in order to accomplish that big goal. And when smaller, more immediate goals are established, they're usually so vague or chosen as a result of unjustifiable logical leaps like the aforementioned 15s business that it's difficult to actually become invested in them. Incredibly, the show never even bothers to specifically establish what the change in the timeline is the heroes have to prevent in order to restore their reality. Eventually, they decide they have to protect Picard's astronaut ancestor because in the original timeline, she discovered a possibly intelligent microorganism during her mission to one of the moons of Jupiter, and Picard guesses if she doesn't do that, it would be bad. How would one astronaut not going on a mission that discovered a new form of microscopic life lead to Earth becoming a xenophobic dictatorship rather than an egalitarian utopia? Good question. Picard actually admits that he doesn't know himself. He's just grasping at straws. And it's never explained or questioned after that. If you're writing a show about people whose reality is altered because somebody in the past changed the timeline, don't you think it would be a good idea at some point to firmly, explicitly establish what the change in the timeline was and why it mattered, so the audience, not to mention the characters, have some idea what the hell is going on? Goals are vaguely defined at best and often non-existent. There are times throughout the season where not only is it unclear what the characters are trying to accomplish ultimately, it's unclear what they're trying to accomplish in that scene. Sometimes I'm not sure if the characters themselves even know what they're trying to accomplish. Throughout Picard Season 2, characters just do things. Things that they have little or no established reason to do, and things that wind up not actually mattering anyway. In Episode 4, Raffi and Seven steal a police car with extremely weak justification, attract the attention of nearby cops through gratuitous reckless driving, and proceed to have a quote-unquote car chase through the streets of Los Angeles where, for most of it, they are running from no one and trying to get to no place in particular. It ends when other LAPD cars, which they have theoretically been trying to evade this whole time, suddenly appear and surround them, only for Dr. Jurati to beam them away to relative safety at the last moment. The car chase is poorly motivated at best, carried out against mostly unseen pursuers, does nothing to advance the story or develop either Raffi or Seven's characters, and ends when they are rescued by another character having done nothing to save themselves from the supposedly threatening situation they needlessly created. The only impressive thing about the sequence is how it's able to exemplify all of the show's plot and story structure problems in just a few pointless minutes. These are serious, impossible to ignore writing problems that seem to have been brushed aside with a shrug and an, oh well, whatever. I have no idea what the writer's room of Star Trek Picard looks like, but it would not surprise me at all to walk in there and find those words painted in huge block letters on one of the walls. Oh well, whatever. The second category of Star Trek Picard Season 2's writing problems, yes, all of that was just the first category. I'm so sorry. Anyway, the second category consists of problems related to the characters, of which there are quite a few. Problems, I mean, not characters. I mean, there are quite a few characters too, and they all have problems. Characterization throughout Picard Season 2 is shallow, weakly developed, and poorly explored, and this problem afflicts all the major characters of the show equally. Long-established legacy characters like Jean-Luc Picard and Q suffer just as much as returning characters from the show's first season like Rios and Raffi and Jurati, who suffer just as much as new characters introduced for this season like Picard's astronaut ancestor Renee and others who I'll get to in a few minutes. Let's start with Picard himself, though, because he is, allegedly, the lead protagonist, and ultimately the plot of the season hinges on his character. In theory. As Season 2 of the show named after him begins, Picard seems to be doing pretty well. They just harvested a bunch of grapes at his family vineyard. He's back in Starfleet as the Chancellor of the Academy. He's a robot now, but everybody seems really cool about it. It's almost never mentioned, in fact. But, oh, the life of Jean-Luc Picard is not as idyllic as it seems, because he's hanging out one night with Laris, his live-in caretaker, and they're drinking some wine. And she's like, so, you know how my husband died off-screen during the hiatus? And Picard's like, oh, sure. And Laris says, well, I've been thinking that the best way to honor his memory would be to jump on that dick. And Picard's like, this dick right here? And Laris is like, yeah. And Picard's like, maybe. But then again, maybe not. Lara says, "Oh, that's right, you joined Starfleet because you were running away from something, and you've never slowed down long enough to truly get close to another person, and that's why you're alone, so terribly alone." And I remember sitting on my couch watching this episode thinking, what? We also learn in episode 1 of season 2 that Jean-Luc has been repressing traumatic memories related to his mother and her apparently violent relationship with his father. Since when is Picard some lonely heart with emotionally debilitating mommy issues? It strikes a decidedly false note for a series that trades as heavily on nostalgia and fan service as Picard to suddenly retcon its lead character, who is also one of the lead characters of the entire Star Trek franchise, so drastically. Because through all 7 seasons of TNG, all 4 TNG movies, and the first season of this series, there was never any indication that Jean-Luc Picard was lonesome or miserable or incapable of forming close relationships, romantic or otherwise. He had regrets, sure. He was aloof, solitary. He seemed like the kind of guy who didn't make close friends easily, but he did have them, just as he had girlfriends, even 1 or 2 who seemed serious, or at least potentially serious. And look, I've said many times before, I have no problem with retcons. I have no problem with ignoring established continuity or altering established characters for the sake of a good story. The issue here for me isn't that they changed something about Picard or made a significant and extremely belated addition/alteration to his backstory. My problem is twofold. One, that they did that for the sake of a shitty, terribly told story, and 2, that the changes they introduce in Season 2 make Picard a flatter, less interesting character. Instead of a guy who joined Starfleet because he wanted to explore, to discover, to dedicate his life to a larger purpose, whose commitment to duty above all made him a difficult person for others to get close to, now he's just another modern adventure hero who's running from trauma. Defining character traits with simple A to B explanations. Why did he join Starfleet? Because he was running away from a bad childhood. Why didn't he ever have a long-term romantic partner? Because he's been sad about his mommy. Changing characters is fine. Even characters that have existed for decades through hundreds of hours of media. Retconning, establish continuity to add or subtract or reinterpret things is fine. But the questions I think any writer who proposes those kinds of changes to a character like Picard needs to ask are, will these changes make the story I'm telling better? And will these changes make this character better? In the case of Star Trek Picard Season 2, both of those questions must be answered with an emphatic no. Season 2 brings in another major legacy character to play an, again theoretically, important role in its story, Q. Like Jean-Luc Picard, Q is also different than we've ever seen him before. And like Jean-Luc, unfortunately, the differences work to the detriment of Q's character and the story he's a part of. The writers of Season 2 do at least go through the trouble of providing an explanation for why Q's personality is so different than we've ever seen. He's dying. It's never explained why or how he's dying. He's just dying. Okay, I actually don't have a big problem with that. Truthfully, knowing that any explanation this show would offer for it would probably take the form of a fanficky exposition monologue, like Guinan's pointless sharing of the story behind her magic Q summoning bottle in episode 7. I'm happy for Q's sudden onset mortality to just be a thing that's happening. But just because there's an in-story explanation for why Q isn't acting like Q, that doesn't mean it was a wise creative choice. Q is one of the most beloved characters of the TNG era of the franchise. Some of the most highly regarded episodes of TNG are Q episodes. Hell, some of my favorite TNG episodes are Q episodes. And when I think of those episodes, and when I think of my favorite scenes and lines and moments with Q, the one quality that comes up again and again, in almost all of them, is that Q is funny. Funny isn't all he is. He's not just a comic relief character, and arguably his one Deep Space Nine episode and some of his appearances on Star Trek Voyager leaned too heavily into his more cartoonish qualities, but almost all of the classic episodes to feature Q are very funny, or at least have laugh-out-loud moments. The only exception I can think of is Q Who from TNG's second season, the episode where Q introduces the Enterprise and us to the Borg. Q still plays the capricious trickster god, but instead of dropping hilarious one-liners, he's callous and almost cruel, which suits the rest of the episode, which is fraught with peril and dread. But again, that's the exception. That's one of the few times in TNG when Q isn't funny. Hell, one of the most important reasons why we even give a shit about the relationship between Q and Picard in the first place is because so many of their scenes crackle with comic tension. They make a brilliant double act. Picard, the straight man, Q, the chaotic provocateur. So, I don't know. All that being the case, it seems like if the creators of Star Trek Picard wanted to bring Q, once again played by the brilliant John Delancey, back to the screen, they should have written him so that he was funny? At least sometimes? Instead of no times? Which is what they did? In addition to the mystifying decision to bring back one of the franchise's funniest characters, played by one of the franchise's funniest actors, and not write him a single joke, quip, or zinger, there's also the problem of Q's motivation. Why does he do what he does in this story? Near the end of episode 10, Q explains that he orchestrated the entire altered timeline scenario to show Picard that, despite the lingering grief and trauma he still carried related to his mother, he was worthy of love. And Q did this because Picard mattered to him. Even gods have favorites, Jean-Luc, Q says, and you have always been one of mine. That's nice and all, but if Q's intention from the beginning was to lead Picard toward personal growth, why did he also manipulate Adam Sung to try and stop Picard from repairing history? Q had already impersonated a psychiatrist and undermined astronaut Rene Picard's confidence enough to convince her to drop out of the Europa mission, which was the thing that changed the timeline, I guess. So why take extra steps to make fixing that even more difficult? For that matter, why do any of this at all? Even with his godlike abilities waning, couldn't Q have thought of another way to free Picard from the mommy issues that have apparently haunted him for his entire life? A way that didn't place the existence of the Federation and the future of humanity in jeopardy? What if Picard and his friends failed to reset the timeline? What if they incorrectly interpreted the laughably flimsy and nebulous clues that they used to figure out what to do? Then not only would Picard presumably just die in the 21st century with all of his repressed trauma intact, the Federation would be permanently overwritten by the expansionist authoritarian regime of the Confederation. Would Q be okay with that? He's supposedly doing all this because he's dying and he wants to help his old buddy Jean-Luc one last time because he's secretly a nice guy, right? But if Jean-Luc and his friends screw it up, oh well, I guess the future is fascist now. I'm dying soon anyway. What do I care? Q turned into such a boomer. Besides Jean-Luc and Q, the character most damaged by the lazy and nonsensical writing of Season 2 is probably Captain Rios. Of all the protagonists, Rios arguably has the worst experience in the 21st century. He is seriously injured moments after he beams into Los Angeles. For no reason, he materializes in midair and takes a nasty fall to the sidewalk. Then he's taken in an ice raid, detained and brutalized in an ice facility, and is in the process of being relocated to a sanctuary district before Seven and Raffi bust him out. And yet, later that same night, Rios is dressed up at the fancy astronaut party, talking about how awesome it is that the cigars have real tobacco, and he's so happy that Raffi comments on the glow he seems to have. He was being unjustly detained by officers of an abusive and systemically racist government agency a few hours before. But now he's all like, I love the 21st century, because he digs the cigars and the food. And also he has a crush on the pretty doctor he met. What the hell? Not only does it reinforce how pointless the whole ICE subplot was, it literally accomplished nothing. It makes Rios appear shallow and self-centered by 21st century standards, let alone those of the more evolved and enlightened century Rios is supposedly from. And it only gets worse because in the last episode, Rios decides to stay behind in the 21st century. We've seen Rios' life in the 25th century. In the first episode of Season 2, he's returned to Starfleet. He's the captain of a brand new starship, the Stargazer, successor to Picard's old ship, no less. Life seems pretty good. Plus, Rios says he never really had a family. That is, until he met Picard and the rest of the gang. And he says this right before he leaves that beloved surrogate family behind forever to stay with a woman he just met 2 days ago and her young child in the filthy, racist 21st century. Enjoy spending your final years trying to survive World War III, you clueless asshole. Other examples of hilariously shitty characterization include Raffi and Seven abruptly swapping personalities when their aforementioned pointless car chase begins, and Jurati saying to the Borg Queen, hey, how about instead of forcibly assimilating people, we try to make friends? And the Borg Queen saying, sounds good. And I guess that's all that was necessary to defeat the Borg this whole time. Just suggest to the Queen that she stop assimilating people and try being nice instead. How did any of this make it to the second draft? Was there a second draft? Was there even a first draft? One final example of how lazy and half-assed the writing of Picard Season 2 is when it comes to its characters. Did you notice how many actors from Season 1 came back but didn't play their previously established characters? It happens with not one, not two, but 3 actors who played major characters in Season 1. Issa Briones, who plays Soji in Season 1, appears as Soji in the first episode of Season 2, and then returns in Episode 5 as Kor, a completely different character who just so happens to be identical to Soji, although this resemblance is implicitly explained by the fact that Kor is the genetically engineered daughter of Adam Sung, who is an ancestor of Alton Sung, who, along with Bruce Maddox, created Soji in the late 24th century. Adam Sung is, of course, played by Brent Spiner, who also played Alton Sung and Data in the first season of Picard. Last but not least, there's Orla Brady, who plays Laris in Season 1, and very briefly at the beginning and end of Season 2, and who spends the rest of her time in Season 2 playing the physically identical character of Talon, or as I call her in my Picard episode reviews, not Laris. So, think about this. The creators of this series had 3 actors from Season 1, Issa Briones, Brent Spiner, and Orla Brady, who they wanted to bring back for Season 2, or perhaps had to contractually, I don't know, and they couldn't think of anything for their established characters to do, so the creators just shrugged and said, screw it! All 3 of them can play new characters that just so happen to be identical to their old characters. Once would have been a cute trick. Twice in the same heavily serialized season would be pushing it, even on a good show. 3 times feels like they just didn't give a shit. Oh, and here's the best part. You remember how Laris spontaneously gets the hots for Picard, and then Picard has to endure a 10-episode alternate reality time travel adventure in order to achieve the realization that it's okay for him to also have the hots for her? A love so shaped by destiny that the universe itself seems to intervene on its behalf, arranging said time travel adventure so that Picard grows close to and then tragically loses a woman who looks, sounds, and acts exactly like Laris? A romance so consequential, the producers choose to end the season with it. The final episode concluding with the image of Picard and Laris reunited hand in hand. You remember? Laris? Yeah, she's not really going to be in season 3 all that much. Reportedly, she shows up in like one episode, but that's pretty much it. Oh well, whatever. Third, final, and honestly least significant category of Picard Season 2's writing problems: gratuitous and obnoxious fan service. I say least significantly because if this had been an otherwise good show, I probably would have just rolled my eyes at these and forgotten about them. But because there's not enough of actual value in this season to draw my attention, and because I am naturally hostile to pandering, cloying fan service of this sort, they stick out as especially egregious. The punk on the bus. He shows up in episode 4, and he looks exactly the same as he does in Star Trek 4, albeit a few decades older, and he's doing the exact same thing he was doing in Star Trek 4. And Seven tells him to turn the noise down, just like Kirk. Remember that thing from before? Here it is again. Recognize it? Oh, sure, there are some differences. In Star Trek 4, he's listening to a song called I Hate You, and this time, he's listening to a song called I Still Hate You. Isn't that clever? And instead of giving Seven the finger when she tells him to turn it down, he meekly complies because he remembers the Vulcan neck pinch he got for his trouble back almost 40 years before. Nice that the punk from this lazy, terrible fan service gag gets more character development than some of the show's actual characters. When I complain about Lower Decks not being my cup of tea because it leans too heavily on presenting references in place of actual jokes, this is the kind of shit I'm talking about. It makes no sense in the context of the story. It's not making a point about anything. It's not making fun of anything. It's just there for us to go, oh hey, it's the same guy. And since he chickened out this time, I guess it's up to me. Guinan's Bar on Earth, in both the 21st and 25th centuries, being located at 10 Forward Avenue. Get it? Because it's what her place was called on the Enterprise D and TNG. It's the same. Will Wheaton's pointless afterthought of a cameo as Wesley Crusher. Okay, so this is the only one that would have bothered me even if the rest of the show was good. Then again, if the rest of the show was written well, this bit probably wouldn't be in there at all, because everything about it is fucking god-awful. What's so awful about it? For one, it's just dropped in out of nowhere, with no setup whatsoever. Wesley just kind of shows up, and everybody assumes we all know who he is. And of course, most of us know who he is because we've seen Star Trek The Next Generation, but that's not the point. If you're going to have a character in your show, even if only for one scene, and you're going to treat that character as though they are important, you need to show us why they are important in your show. Or at least set up the fact that they exist before they just show up. Not only has Wesley not been seen outside of a deleted scene from Star Trek Nemesis since the final season of TNG back in 1994, he hasn't been mentioned once before in Star Trek Picard. They could have at least had Picard bring him up in episode 1 just to establish his name and who he was before he walks up to Core in episode 10 looking like he just jumped out of a boxcar. He reveals that he and the other travelers are in charge of the Watchers, people like Not Laris, who guard the integrity of the timeline, which is deeply dumb, but could they not have done something with that before Wesley shows up? At least establish that Not Laris has a supervisor, is accountable to someone without revealing who he is until the cameo. Maybe have the supervisor show up at one point when Not Laris is alone and don't show the supervisor's face so it's like a tease that there's someone important. It's not great, but at least it's something. Instead, Wesley walks up to Core, a character he's never met, who has no idea who he is or why he's important, tells her his name, which has never been said in this show and is likewise of no importance to her, and offers to make her a traveler through space and time, much like himself. Why her? No reason. Because she's a spare character, and the writers wanted to tie up her loose end, and one of them said, what if we just have Wesley show up and take her with him? And the producers were like, I mean, it's completely out of left field, makes no sense, means nothing, and comes across like an idea we lifted from a teenage Trekkie shitty fanfic, but oh well, whatever. Also, nothing against Will Wheaton, who seems like a lovely guy, but could somebody have reminded him that he's supposed to be acting? I get that it's been a while since we've seen him, so I wouldn't have expected Will to play Wesley exactly like he did 30 years ago, but I would have expected Will to play Wesley, not just grin and chuckle his way through his lines like he's throwing to a pre-tape on the goddamn Ready Room. Seriously, what is the point of this supposed to be? Wes has no interaction with characters in the show he actually knows, and no effect on the story other than to provide an unnecessary resolution for another nothing character who is only there because the producers wanted to bring back Issa Briones but didn't care enough to give her anything important to do. I'll tell you what the point is supposed to be. So we can see Wesley. That's it. Doesn't matter why he's there or what he's doing. We're just supposed to be thrilled to be seeing Wesley. He's there to be recognized. Like the punk on the bus and 10 Forward. He's not a character. He's a guy sitting in the back of a convertible, waving at us as he rolls by. Maybe that's why I have such a low opinion of these sorts of, hey, look who it is, cameos. Because if there's one thing I have absolutely no use for whatsoever, it's a parade. So those are the 3 categories of problems. That's my attempt to answer from my perspective the question in the title of this video. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, but either way, I hope it makes sense. As you can probably tell, I've thought about this a lot, probably too much, honestly, but I keep coming back to it because whenever I try to answer the question of what actually went wrong with Picard Season 2, I inevitably find myself pondering another question. How? How is it this bad? How was it allowed to be this bad? Did no one read these scripts before they were sent to the actors? Did no one notice that multiple plot threads go nowhere and mean nothing? That characters' choices and experiences in the show don't seem to affect them at all? That goals and stakes, both big picture and immediate, are nebulously defined at best and sometimes just not defined at all? Did no one think it was a problem that Seven and Raffi spend most of episode 8 just standing in an alley? Did no one think it was a problem that Adam Sung is able to conjure a team of armed mercenaries out of thin air at the end of that same episode? Or that those mercenaries are partially Borgified and it makes absolutely no difference to anything whatsoever? Or that Elnor is killed off for no reason, brought back as a hologram for no reason, then magically resurrected by Q in the end anyway? Did no one think it was a problem that nothing that happens in this season means anything, changes anything, or goes anywhere? My task here is critical analysis. I'm not trying to rewrite the show. But I mean, somebody should have. These people are professionals. That's maybe the most baffling part. The people who write this show are good. I'm not one of those miserable fandom menace assholes who's like, these writers suck, they don't even know anything about Star Trek. That's obviously horseshit. They clearly know a lot about Star Trek, and many of these same people have also worked on Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Strange New Worlds, both of which are vastly superior to this show, especially Strange New Worlds, which premiered on the same day Season 2 of Picard ended and went on to have the best first season of any Star Trek show since Star Trek, the original series. So don't tell me these people don't know how to make great Star Trek, because they do. They just didn't do that here. I know what went wrong in terms of the writing. It's there on the screen for all to see. There are problems so glaring and so rooted in the fundamentals of storytelling and writing mechanics that they should have been caught and fixed before anyone even started a first draft of the first episode. But they weren't fixed. Somehow, for some reason, this season got made and made it to TV like this. But it's not all bad. I don't know about you, but when I see a bad show or a bad movie and I take the time to really dig into it and figure out why I think it's so bad, it gives me an even greater appreciation for the good stuff when I see it, which I do a lot, including in current Star Trek shows. Just not this one. That's right, hug it out, you saps. Sentimental drivel. Actually, you know what? I don't blame him. After I got through all 10 episodes, I felt like a hug too. Let me in there! Come on! Make a hole! Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is going to be, but before I do that, I want to give shoutouts to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Alex Mariani, thanks Alex. B, thanks B. Stephen Dopp, thanks Stephen. Next, new channel members. They are Sandra Kraft, thanks Sandra, Luck Dragon, thanks Luck Dragon, and Sean Collins, thanks Sean. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice-monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout-out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift rather than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button below the video or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, The Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. And now, to next month's Regulation Trek Actually topic. This topic, as chosen by my patrons and channel members, will have us revisiting a corner of the Star Trek franchise that, candidly, I haven't spent much time talking about in this series. It's the show that chronicles the adventures of the first Starship Enterprise. No, not that one. The first Starship Enterprise. There we go. Enterprise. The show. Set aboard the ship. Named that. Next month's Trek Actually video is called Why Dr. Phlox is actually Star Trek Enterprise's best character. And it's about, well, I'll let you work that out for yourselves. Should be fun. That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then. So until the next time you see me, whenever that is, thanks for watching and take care, everybody.